of us feel weighed down by our past, by traumas, loss, or long periods of difficulty. But God can redeem even the most painful circumstances for our good and His glory. That's our subject today on Truth for Life, as Alistair Begg begins a new series titled The Hand of God, Volume 1.
For those of you who enjoy stories, and I love stories, we are at the threshold of a classic, indeed an epic, a saga. This story is as good a story as any that unfolds for us in the whole of the Old Testament record. The biography of Joseph covers more space than any space that is given to any of the other heroes in the book of Genesis, more than to Adam or to Noah or even to Abraham, and actually more than is given to his father Jacob. Even those of us who have only a scanty knowledge of the Old Testament will probably know of Joseph. And the reason we will know of Joseph is the same way that we know of Jonah, because of the whale, or of Noah, because of the ark, and this fellow Joseph, because of his multicolored coat. He provides for us probably the classic Old Testament illustration of the New Testament truth summarized in Romans 8 and 28. All things work together for good to those who love God, who are the called according to His purpose. There is perhaps no other character to whom we may go in the whole of the Old Testament than this character Joseph, who quite amazingly provides this awesome summary of this very, very important verse. The story of Joseph, as we will see, is a tale of bitter jealousy, of deceit, of slavery, misrepresentation, injustice, lust, rivalry, forgiveness, brothers fighting brothers, resenting parental influence. It's the story of imprisonment. It's the story of deep trials that do not produce self-pity. It is the account of prosperity that comes to one without the accompanying pride. And in it all, the overarching theme is that of the sovereignty of God, bringing about that which He has purposed in the affairs of time, and the wonderful truth of His providential care over those who are His dearly loved children. In short, it ought to be for us a story of great encouragement, of great reassurance, as we come as scattered individuals and various families from different backgrounds and places at different points along the continuum of faith, carrying with us the baggage of our past, the fears of our present, and the prospects of our future, and wondering somehow, in the midst of all these individual pieces of the jigsaw puzzle of life, does God care? Is God in control? And what might we expect? But before we address the matters that go from age 17 to age 110, what I want to consider with you this morning are the incidents in and the influences on the life of Joseph prior to the age of 17. This, of course, is how my mind works. I look at the verse that says, and he was 17 years old and he was looking after sheep. Yes, I say, but where did he come from? What kind of family did he have? What kind of role model did his dad provide? Did Joseph come from the kind of family background we might expect to produce a character such as he? What are his family ties? And indeed, if you would like a title for this morning's study, you could simply call it Family Ties. All of us have them. They all mean something, and they are fraught and full. They are blessed and they are benighted. All of us know the experience of life unfolding. Now, there's no question that he came from quite a background. Not every 17-year-old could boast that his great-grandfather was Abraham, or that his grandpa was Isaac, or that his dad was Jacob and his mother was Rachel. He had come from quite a context. But what I want to do is to consider it from the point of his dad, the man Jacob. Jacob, as you may recall, had as his name that which was figuratively meaning the deceiver or the chiseler. He had been aptly named because almost from his birth he had been very skillful and very manipulative at getting things that he wanted in the way that he wanted. He was at the same time a very focused individual. When he set his mind to something, he was ready to give it all that he had. And nowhere was this more obvious than in the realm of his love life. Because we're told in Genesis 29 that when his eyes fastened, having gone to live in the country of Laban, when his eyes fastened upon this girl Rachel, it really rang his bell. Genesis 29 and verse 15, Laban said to him, "Just because you're a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Well, whether Jacob had already thought of this before or whether he thought of it on the fly, he was quick with his answer. He had noticed the fact that his uncle Laban had two girls. The older girl was Leah, the younger one was Rachel. We're told that Leah had weak eyes, or she was delicate, or she was kind of frail, or she was just not what Rachel was. Whereas Rachel, we're told, was lovely in form and beautiful. And Jacob had fallen in love with Rachel. And so when his uncle asked him, "What would you like for your wages?" he said, "How does Rachel sound?" And by the way, he said, "I will work for you for 7 years for Rachel." Now that's quite a deal. I mean, you may have asked your father-in-law for his daughter's hand in marriage, but I don't know how many who are here this morning went to their prospective father-in-law and said, "I will work for you for nothing for the next 7 years if I can marry your daughter." And that is exactly what he did. Now, ironically, his uncle Laban was a bit of a schemer himself. And he deceives his nephew Jacob by slipping his older daughter to him on the night of their marriage experience. Genesis 29, verse 22. Jacob had said to Laban, "Give me my wife, my time is completed, and I want to lie with her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast, and when the evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, and Jacob lay with her. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. Now there's a ton of stuff contained in that verse there. You've got to understand Eastern custom. You've got to understand the bridal veils. You've got to understand the purity and sanctity of the event. And you've got to understand that when Laban went to his bed at night, he must have said to his wife, "You wait till tomorrow morning, it's going to be unbelievable." And unbelievable it was. Verse 25, when morning came, there was Leah. There was Leah, you're right. So Jacob said to Laban, "What's this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Then Laban, trying to legitimize the whole affair, says, "Listen, the custom is that you can't give away your younger daughter till you've given away your older daughter. So I determined I must first give you my older daughter. Now I've done that. But here's the deal. If you will fulfill the responsibilities of the bridal week, I'll give you Rachel, provided you work for me for another 7 years." And the relationship between uncle and nephew, as you read it in the record here, is just a chronicle of one schemer trying to outdo another schemer in various business deals and family affiliations all the way through. Now, the family picture album at this point begins to fill in. If it was in contemporary terms, the babies would be getting born and the pictures would be going on the piano or wherever it is you put them. And they were getting put up there at a rate of knots. Leah produces 4 children in a row because God favors her. We're told that in the record. Leah was not immediately favored by her husband, and yet God favored her. Rachel was supremely favored by her husband, and God closed her womb. God is sovereign, even in the details of these things. We don't think in these terms today, but we should, because it is right to do so. And so you read, for example, in verse 32 and following of chapter 29, the way in which Leah was giving birth to all these children. And she's giving birth to them one verse at a time, as it were. You'll notice in verse 32 that she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She called him Reuben. Verse 33, she conceived again and gave birth to a son, called him Simeon. Verse 34, she conceived and gave birth to a son and called him Levi. And verse 35, she conceived again and gave birth to a son, and she called him Judah. And then notice the cryptic statement that ends chapter 29. Then she stopped having children. Okay, so far so good. But Rachel, when she saw she was not bearing Jacob any children, became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob says, "Hey, get serious. I'm not God. I'm just Jacob. I'm not in charge of who has children." And so she did what was customary at the time. She took the servant maid Bilhah that she had been given, and she gave her to Jacob as a wife. "Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family." Any children born through the servant maid would be credited as children of Rachel. And so matters take their course. And Bilhah gives birth to Dan in verse 6 and to Naphtali in verse 7. Now Leah, whose productivity had dwindled, decides on the same strategy with her maidservant Zilpah. And Zilpah and Jacob get together, and Zilpah in turn gives birth to Gad in verse 10 and then to Asher in verse 13. And then you have this unbelievable thing here where they're trading favors on the strength of mandrakes. Rachel and Leah are talking to one another, and Rachel says to Leah, "Give me some of your son's mandrakes." And she said to her, "Wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you also take my son's mandrakes too?" That's a little bit over the top, isn't it? Could I have a few mandrakes? "Hey, you took my husband, now you want my grapes? What's the deal?" Now look at this reaction. "Very well," Rachel said. "He can sleep with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." So when Jacob came in from the fields that evening, Leah went out to meet him. "You must sleep with me," she said. "I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." A little touch of feminism in there, wouldn't you say? I don't know what it is. And so that was that. God listened to Leah. She became pregnant. She bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah said, "God has rewarded me for giving my maidservant to my husband." So she named him Issachar. And then she conceived again, and she bore him a sixth son. And she said, "God has presented me with a precious gift. And this time my husband will treat me with honor because I have borne him 6 sons." So she named him Zebulun. And then she pops out a daughter named Dinah. So, this thing is going hog wild. We got kids all over the place. We got 6 boys and a daughter straight up by Leah, 2 by her servant maids, that's 9, 2 by the other servant maid, that's 11. So we got 10 boys, 1 girl, 1 dad, 4 mothers, 2 concubines. You think you've got a complicated family? I don't want to hear your stuff, frankly. And then comes Joseph. In the midst of all of this, hey, this is the Bible. This is history. This is not mythology. Do you realize that out of this came Jesus, the Messiah? Verse 22 of Genesis 30. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and opened her womb. And she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. And she said, "God has taken away my disgrace." And she named him Joseph. And she said, "May the Lord add to me another son." And so into all of that background comes this little bundle. And they call him Joseph. And they love him. Now what you need to understand in this narrative progression here is that while it is not chronicled for us with step-by-step and pinpoint accuracy, it is clear that At points where there is silence, there is a fair progression of time. At points where it says they stopped, they obviously stopped for a fair length of time, because you will see that you go between verse 24 in chapter 30 and the verses later on, and in that you've got the space of 17 years that is all wrapped up in the formative stages of the life of Joseph. And sometime after he was born, however short or long, maybe months, maybe years, his father determines that they're going to move. The kind of occurrence that has happened in many people's lives before then and since then. Discussion around the table, mom and dad have a talk, finally they conclude, we're moving. He wouldn't understand all that it meant, but he would know that a big change was underway. And in that tiny lad's life, God was already forming his character for an exceptional purpose which Joseph nor any of the others understood. Through it all, God was working and planning and putting into the mechanism of this young boy's experience the essential factors and feelings that would be necessary for him to be his man in his place at his time. God is sovereign in all these things. I reckon it's a safe estimate to say that by the time they were ready to make the move, Joseph was probably 6 or 7 years old. And therefore, he would have been aware of the fact that they were on the move. They would have looked forward to it. They would have prepared the children for it. And he probably had, as one of his earliest recollections, the moonlight flit, which is recorded for us in verse 17 of Genesis 31. I can remember when we moved here, all the questions from my children. When are we going to go? How are we going to go? Will we drive there? No, we can't drive there. There's an ocean. Well, what will we do? Go on a boat? No, we'll go on a plane. And all the normal questions. When they got here, they didn't know where they were. When we went on vacation, they thought they were going home. They couldn't process the information. Their tiny lives were just in an amazing whirl. And there was only one constant in it. And that was that their father said, this is it. This is what we're doing. Stick with me. You'll be okay. And for Joseph, the experience would have been exactly the same. Mom, when we go on the camels, will I have my own camel? Hey, my brothers get in a camel. Do I have to ride on your camel? Can I ride in the front? Can I ride shotgun? All the kind of questions. I don't say these things for effect. I say these things in order to bring home the reality of this. This is a real family, a real mom and dad, a real group of people making a real journey. And in it all, God is fashioning and forming this young character for a future as yet unknown. In the same way that He has done in every generation to one degree or another. He fashioned the life of Dwight L. Moody in total obscurity so that one day in a shoe shop in Boston, He may lay His hand upon him and bring him forth. He fashions the life of individuals and is doing so, God willing, in our congregation even in these days, for lives as yet unaware of that which God is purposing for them. Because He is sovereign, He is providential, and He is gracious, and He is kind, and He is wise. And on to the camels they go, with all the livestock, verse 18, being driven ahead, and all the goods accumulated in Padan Aram, some of them legitimately and some of them a little illegitimately, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. And Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. You can imagine little Joseph saying to his mom, "Hey, Mom, why did you take that stuff from Grandpa's house before we left?" "What stuff, Joseph?" "Well, those things he had in that corner cupboard. You know, when I would go over to his house, when I would sleep over, I always would see those things. He called them his gods." "Why did you take Grandpa's stuff?" "I'll be quiet, Joseph. Don't worry about it. You know, your grandpa knows me, and I know your grandpa, and you just run along and you just go and play with the sheep." "Hey, Dad, why are we running away? Don't you like Grandpa? Doesn't Grandpa love us? I mean, why have we got the camels all revved up? Why do we have to go away under cover of darkness like this? Hey, Mom, how come Grandpa showed up? How come Grandpa and all the gang are camping over here beside us? You can imagine his tiny mind trying to process all this information. Do you think he was in the circle in verse 26 of chapter 31? Do you think he was on the fringe listening when his grandpa looked at his dad and said, "What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war"? Joseph would have been saying to himself, "That's right. That's what I said. I said, why are we running away?" And now Grandpa came and said, "That's exactly what we're doing. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so that I could send you away with a party?" That's the significance of with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and harps. And Joseph, if he had anything about it himself, would have been saying, "That's exactly what I was thinking. Why did we go off like that? Why didn't we have a nice big send-off? Why didn't we have a nice meal and a party and off?" And so he would have been listening. And do you think that wee boy did not process the question in verse 28, "You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren and my daughters goodbye. You've done a foolish thing." Now, I don't know about your relationship with your grandpa, but mine was as close as it ever could be. He never drove a car as a result of wounds to his body in the First World War. And so we became experts on public transport in Glasgow. I crossed the Clyde on the big ferry and back on the small ferry. I went sometimes 3 times round the whole subway with my grandfather to go nowhere except round and round on the subway and sit next to him. So I don't want anybody tearing me away from my grandpa without a chance to kiss him goodbye. And that's what happened to Joseph. He was going to have a lot of tearing in his life. He was going to have a lot of times when he didn't get to say goodbye. He was going to have to learn how to weep, learn how to deal with the pain, learn how to deal with having his insides ripped out of him. And even in these early circumstances, God was forming and framing his tiny life in preparation for what would be. Oh, this is a wonderful, wonderful story.
Alistair Begg with a message titled Family Ties on Truth for Life. Today's message is the first in a new series titled The Hand of God, Volume 1. If you'd like to listen again, or if you'd like to share this message with a friend, visit us online at truthforlife.org. In this new study, we're going to explore the life of Joseph, a man who faced countless trials, including betrayal, slavery, and injustice, and yet through it all, he continued to trust in God's sovereign plan. We too can have faith that God is working in every circumstance for our good and for His glory. In fact, that's the subject of a book titled God's Grace in Your Suffering, written by David Paulison. David is a teacher, an author, and a counselor who has walked with countless men and women through some of their most painful seasons of life. Paulison draws on this experience as he helps to wrestle with the problem of pain. This book is shaped around the classic hymn, How Firm a Foundation. As you read, you'll discover new depth and beauty in the lyrics, truths you can cling to as you walk through the storms of life. If you or someone you love is going through a difficult season, wrestling with doubts, you'll appreciate the insights in this book. You're welcome to request a copy when you donate today to support this ministry. Your gift helps men and women access clear, relevant Bible teaching, and their thanks for this ministry belongs to you. Call 888-588-7884 or give and request the book online at truthforlife.org. I'm Bob Lepine, hoping you'll join us next time as we continue the story of Joseph's early life. Be sure to listen Friday. This daily program features the Bible teaching of Alistair Begg and is furnished by Truth for Life, where the learning is for living.